Good morning. Dead ends and new beginnings. When I got the email about a month ago, they wanted me to speak, and I said, okay, when do you want me to speak? And they said, the 27th. So I just put it on the calendar. So I looked about 2 weeks ago, and it said, Easter. I said, oh, okay. Yes. In most churches today, or not all churches, because Orthodox Easter is a little bit different calendar-wise, people are celebrating the resurrection. There are a lot of things going on in the culture. Last Sunday I had a spring equinox ceremony, which is the celebration of the coming of the spring. Okay, now in the Unitarian Universalist Church, we celebrate it by flowers, by flower communion, which I like. There are a lot of other things going on in the culture. Some people are big into fertility with rabbits and eggs, for example. And if you go up to Hershey, Pennsylvania, you can have a chocolate binge. So there's all sorts of things going on in terms of Easter. But most versions of Christianity, with us perhaps excluded, believe in the resurrection. Now, as my life journey has taken me, I've had the opportunity to teach in very interesting places. One very interesting place to teach was the United States Army. And living in Baltimore until about 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to teach at a Roman Catholic seminary for 2 years. And that's when I first became aware that religion were really boxes, because they brought me in and said, you will teach ABC and not XYZ, you know, in terms of things that are going on. But I taught there for 2 years, then took a break, did some undergraduate teaching, and then 3 years later went over to Wesley Theological Seminary and taught 3 years for them. And they had another box. And so I began to look at religious phenomenon as my box is bigger than your box, my box is better than your box, and so forth, and so on. Well, to start, where did Christianity kind of get off the track? I think I can nail it for you pretty specifically. In 325, the Council of Nicaea decided that the Gnostics, and that's pretty much everybody in this room, were heretics. Now, what's a heretic? A heretic is a person who's thinking and believing the wrong things. And of course, it becomes a matter of who says what are the right things and what are the wrong things. So what happened is Christianity got off on this axis about what is heresy and what is not heresy and so forth. My own personal take of that is that we should be much more concerned about what people do. Whether people bomb one another, whether people are kind to one another. Let's get off this, you know, what we think or believe. People do ask me questions about what I believe for some reason. And somebody about a month ago said, do you believe in angels? I thought for a minute and said, no. I work with them. Then the same person wanted to pursue the question, and they said, do you believe in an afterlife? No. But I was there yesterday at 10 o'clock and at 2 o'clock. So it's not a matter of believing, it's a matter of working and doing what I do. So I think the correct axis is not heresy and what we think and believe, but really what we do. And that brings us to our actions and to our hearts and to compassion. And if I had to have lunch, if I could have lunch with one religious leader, it wouldn't be somebody from Christianity, it would be the Dalai Lama. And he has that infectious smile, and he said, you know, what the Chinese did to my country is very, very wrong, but he smiles and he says, but hate is not good. We must not hate the Chinese. So that's his compassion. So this morning I want to explore with you the phenomenon of dead ends and new beginnings. To live any amount of time is to experience dead ends. The first one I experienced when my late father was promoted with the Pennsylvania Railroad, and we moved from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. And I told my parents that I liked Pittsburgh just fine, and they said, pack your stuff. So, in terms of, so that was an ending because I was leaving my friends. But yet it was a new beginning because then I had an opportunity to pick up new friends. Relationships end, people move, jobs end. You don't get into that school that you were hoping to get into with all your heart and soul. That's a dead end. So you don't have to live very long before you run into dead ends. I don't think many of us like them. We prefer the other ones, the new beginnings. So I was director of a counseling service for 6 years, going through a divorce, and lost that job because of that. And that was at the time a very brutal dead end. Now, 20-some years later, I think it was a good thing. It got me loosened up and headed in other directions. As I was recuperating from my last colonoscopy about 2 weeks ago, I needed some light reading, so I picked the book that I had just recently ordered and came through the mail, Amazon.com. And it's by James Doty, MD, a neurosurgeon, and it's called Into the Magic Shop. Now, James, as a young boy, was growing up in California with his parents, but his life wasn't headed anywhere positive. His father was an alcoholic, couldn't hold a job. Every time he would lose a job, they would be evicted, and then he went through the painful experience of all his stuff being taken to the dump. His mother had seizures and was clinically depressed, and so he didn't have much in the way of parenting. So where is this young boy, and he had 2 siblings, where is he headed? Well, one day he was in town, and he was walking through the town, and something caught his eye. It was a magic shop. Now here's a 10-year-old boy. So what 10-year-old boy doesn't love a magic shop? So he walked in there, and the lady greeted him. Her name was Ruth. She didn't own the magic shop, but her son did. He was not there that day, but she welcomed him and started to talk to him about magic. And so she kind of became his mentor and his guide. She asked him what he would like to do, and he had a positive experience with a medical doctor, so he said, I think that's what I want to do. She encouraged that. She talked to him about his mind, she talked to him about his heart, and the magic he could produce when he united those 2 things. So that relationship continued until he went away locally to college. Was going back on weekends just to keep the family together. He wanted to go to medical school. His quality point average was 2.5. They're not even going to talk to you at that level. But somehow he managed to take the MCAT and get a perfect score. So that at least got him an interview, and that part of the story, he ends up going to Tulane University Medical School and gets a medical degree. Needed to fund it, so here comes the U.S. Army, and 9 years later it's Major James Doty, a neurosurgeon. So his career was well as a neurosurgeon, and in the 90s he began investing in medical technology, and those investments went very well. So one day he called his accountant and attorney and said, what's my portfolio worth? And they said, well, 2 weeks ago it passed $75 million. He was doing well. And he said, this is getting to be a real headache to manage, give it away. So he gave it all to charity, 75 plus million dollars. And people said, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I own a car and I've got a marketable skill. I'm not worried. And so he taught at a underserved area in Mississippi, did his neurosurgery there for a while, wanted to go back to California, and he went back to California and started working at Stanford University as a neurosurgeon. And also they had a center working on human compassion. And one day they wanted to have a high-name speaker, so they decided to invite the Dalai Lama. Well, to their surprise, he said, I'm coming. So he came, and there were apparently some meetings between James Doty and the Dalai Lama. And after he spoke, he went back to wherever the Dalai lives, and then he contacted Stanford University and gave them a large sum, I don't know how much, a large sum of money, the largest contribution to a non-Buddhist organization that he had ever made. So, as I read the book in the magic shop, what the theme of it is the magic continued to follow him, you know? He would put his mind and his heart together and see what needed to be done into the magic shop. And so the person that really created a new beginning in his life was his friend Ruth, because she provided that insight and inspiration. Now, I was up Tuesday and Wednesday at University of Pikeville, seeing some friends, teaching some classes. Well, not teaching some classes. They wanted to see what a shaman, what a healer would do, so I did 2 classes. And the university chaplain had a university-wide lecture, and I was the lecturer. It was not my favorite part of the presentation. There were about 70 students there. And so it wasn't time to heal people, it was time to just talk about it. So I was talking about it. I had an hour to do that. I looked down at the first row, and one young lady looked like she was in serious pain. And so about 15 minutes before I was due to finish, she raised her hand and she says, "Can you heal migraines?" Well, I'm not dodging that in front of 70 people, so I brought her up on stage, worked hard, and finally broke it loose. And she said, "You're better than the MD, thank you." I said, okay. So I was helping her with a new beginning. One of the students, that we had a question and answer part, said, "You seem to have a lot of passion for what you do. You seem to enjoy what you do. Is there any downside to it?" And I said, "Well, yeah, like most things in life, there is a downside." And the student pursued the question and said, "What's the downside?" I said, "When somebody comes for me to healing and I look at their left shoulder and the death angel is sitting there. That's the downside." So I was working with an older woman, and she was calling me once a day in pain and distress and saying, "Please reboot my chakras, they're all down." And I was doing that for 2 weeks, but I was not wanting to continue that forever. So I had her come in with her 40-year-old daughter, and when she walked into my office, the death angel was there. So that had a certain tenor to the conversation. So I told her about that, and she said, "How long?" And I said, "I don't know how long, but it is what it is." And she said, "Is that irreversible?" And I said, "Probably. What do you like to do in life?" And she said, "Well, I used to like to paint, but I gave that up." And I said, "You might want to pick that back up." And then we had a discussion of other things that she needed in her life. As the discussion went forth, in about a half hour, guess who left? The death angel left, because she had a new beginning. She had a vision of what she wanted to do with her life. So again, this happens throughout life, and years ago when I was working as a psychologist and as a therapist, I had a client referred to me by another colleague, and when this woman came in, I knew I was going to have to work. I was her 9th psychotherapist. That's a very humble position, by the way, in terms of it. And a psychiatrist was medicating the antidepressants, and I was working very hard to try to help her grab a hold of a new beginning in her life. She came into the therapy one day and handed me a note. I knew what it was. She was saying goodbye. She had given a note to her husband, her 2 teenage daughters, and this was my note. So I had 1 hour to make an impact. I didn't have time to call a colleague or friend, and so I thought for a minute, and I thought, most of the time I relieve negative emotions, fear and guilt, things like that. I got it. Instead of relieving guilt, I said, this is going to upset me, but only for 2 weeks, and then I'm moving on. Your husband's going to find another woman. He got really angry at that. And it's probably going to mess up your daughters for the rest of their lives. So instead of relieving guilt, I was just layering it in as hard and as best as I could. So very few clients had my home phone number. It was unlisted. And so I went home, had dinner, and she had the phone number for safety reasons. And the phone rang. It was her. She began, "You son of a..." And I was ecstatic. What had I done? The suicide was the hostility turned inward. Now she was thinking of a homicide. Me. So I had, mobilized that. You got to stay in the world if you're going to try to kill me, So a new beginning came out of that. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fun. I didn't enjoy it one little bit, but it worked. As we had a fire ceremony for the equinox last Sunday, some of you braved it. It was cold and windy and a little bit blustery, but the 2 things we do in the ceremony, and a number of you have been there, is the death arrow, which are the things in your life which you want to say goodbye to, the dead ends. And then later on you put the life arrow in, and the life arrow is the things that you want to give birth to in your life. You want to get started. So our life is a series of dead ends and new beginnings, and hopefully as you listen to me, you realize that it's more what we do with our actions, how much compassion we generate. Now, a couple people have been, or a number of people have been important to me in this regard. And the first one is Albert Schweitzer. As I became acquainted with Schweitzer, he came from a little country in between France and Germany called Alsace-Lorraine. And when I was in Germany the first time, I was looking for Alsace in Germany. I was looking in the wrong country. They had lost the Second World War. It went to France, but it has German street names. A little bit confusing. But Schweitzer grew up in that little country, and he was a very bright young man. By the time he was 30 years old, he had 4 earned doctorate degrees, nothing honorary. He had 4. He had a PhD in philosophy, a PhD in theology, a PhD in music, in Bach. He was a very good organist. And last but not least, he was a medical doctor. Now, in Europe, the program for MDs, you go to the medical school, much like you do in this country, but in there you have to write a dissertation. And he was part of what we call the quest for the historical Jesus movement. They wanted to know, scholars wanted to know, what could we really know about Jesus and what he lived and what he taught. And so he wrote a dissertation. And I became very interested in Schweitzer, so I went down to the Methodist bookstore, Cokesbury, and ordered it. And it came in, and the lady said, "Your book is in." And she looked at it and she said, "That's a terrible book." It was titled A Psychiatric Study of Jesus. And I got into the conversation. I said, "Have you read it?" "No." "Well, let's withhold judgment and read it." So to not worry any of you, Schweitzer comes to a twofold conclusion in his dissertation. Either Jesus is who he says he is, in which case the implications of faith in history are enormous, or he's a paranoid schizophrenic with heavy delusional apparatus. So, what Schweitzer did with his life was he could have done almost anything with those 4 degrees, right? Okay? He went to Lambaréné, still in colonial days, French West Africa, and did a clinic for people who didn't have Blue Cross and Blue Shield cards, who didn't have medical insurance. And he gave them the best Western medical care that he could. But he had to fund the clinic, so what he would do is he would send letters back to Europe, to his friends, and about every 2 or 3 years he would go back and do a series of concerts at the cathedrals of Europe. Bach. And that's how he would raise his money and then bring the money and the medical supplies back to Lambaréné. So here's a man that lived a life of compassion, for which the world did recognize him with the Nobel Prize. Now, continuing in that for a minute, there is originally from Holland, but he's in Pretoria, South Africa, Peter Seifert. I ran across this book, and the title captured my attention. The Life of a Galilean Shaman. Now, the word is not used in the New Testament, but Jesus is out talking one day, and a woman walks up and says, "If only I touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed." And he turns around and said, "I felt the power gone out of me. Who touched me?" Sounds like healing to me. So anyway, he's a member of the Jesus Seminar. There are about 100 scholars all over the world that continue this historical quest. So what do we know about the man? Well, we know that he taught in ways of parables, stories. There once was a man who had 2 sons, and also proverbial sayings. So he was a spiritual teacher. That's what he did. We're sure of that. That's the first thing. The second thing is he had some bad social habits, most people would say, and that is he would eat dinner on a regular basis with people that the society had cast off. And there were 2 groups, the tax collectors. Everybody hated the tax collectors, and they usually were collecting taxes for the Romans, who were the occupiers, so there was a double hatred there. And then the other people that he ate dinner with is the women who worked in the sex industry. So, now, has the institutional church followed up on that? What do you think? No, I don't think we've kind of grabbed that part of the teachings. The third part is he's always healing people. Well, a lot of churches have started hospitals, at least got into the Western medicine part of it. He was doing miracles. Got a notice from Smithsonian Institute recently that they're publishing a fresh edition of the Jefferson Bible. Thomas Jefferson translated the Bible, among other things, and but as he did that, he hit the delete button, and he didn't like the miracles, so he deleted each and every one of them. They were an affront, he thought, to the rational mind. So, okay. So dead ends and new beginnings. I have in my movie collection a 1966 movie. It's called The Flight of the Phoenix. It stars Jimmy Stewart as the pilot, and Jimmy Stewart was a World War II bomber pilot, so he had some credentials. Richard Attenborough, Peter Finch, and Ernest Borgnine. It's set in the 1930s in North Africa, and they are a plane taking supplies and crews to one of the oil pumping sites. The plane crashes in a sandstorm, and they have enough food and water for 10 days. So they were contemplating, are we going to be rescued? You know, the radio doesn't work. Finally, one of the engineers says, you know, this is a big plane. If we cannibalize the parts, we can build a little plane. It won't carry any cargo, but it'll carry us out. And that's what they do. And they survive it. You talk about a dead end and a new beginning. And the title of the movie is The Flight of the Phoenix. In Greek mythology, the phoenix is the bird that dies and its ashes are combusted. And what does the phoenix do? Rise from the ashes. The flight of the phoenix. So, to come back to our theme, every life ends with a death sentence, but the story does not end there. So, to live is to experience dead ends, moves, rejections, what have you. And so, some of you may be going through those experiences as I speak. Others may know friends and neighbors that are going through those experiences. So to sum up, what I've been talking about this morning is trying to nudge the faith community off the wrong axis about what we think and believe. I don't think it's so much a matter of what we think and believe. I think it's a matter of how much compassion we can generate and how much action we can do in the world that's going to help it. As one door shuts, another door opens. To live is to experience dead ends, but to live is also to reach out and grab that new beginning. So I think, is Easter an event way back then and there? Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. But there is a rhythm of death and rebirth in our lives. Amen.